Hi everyone, this is Cathy English from the museum. We miss having you come here, but I wanted to present our story, Moon Over Mackenzie, and there's a bit of an I Spy game that you can play along as we're reading this. So this is called Moon Over Mackenzie. One winter evening, Molly and James were walking down Mackenzie Avenue. Now we all know Mackenzie Avenue, that's our street where the band shell is and the grizzly bear statues and a lot of the main downtown businesses. So even though it was nighttime, it was still quite bright out. There must be a full moon, said Molly. They both looked up, and sure enough, there was the biggest full moon they'd ever seen. It looked so big and so close that they felt as though they could jump up and land right on it. They stared at the moon for several minutes, and then they heard a very loud bell. They looked ahead and saw an old steam engine, like the one in the Railway Museum, on the tracks at the end of Mackenzie Avenue. They could hear the engine bell ringing out loud and clear. Now, when you look at this picture, you can find the bell in this picture too. They were very excited to see an old steam engine in town, and they were ready to run down to see it. But they took one step and then stopped and stared. "Wow," exclaimed James, "where are we? This doesn't look like Mackenzie Avenue. Where's City Hall? Where's Grizzly Plaza?" "But it must be Mackenzie Avenue," argued Molly. "Look, there's Modern Bake Shop and some of the other buildings. And that's not Revelstoke in front of us." "But the trees are smaller," said James. "And look at the road. It's dirt, not pavement. And these sidewalks are made of wood. Maybe we're still on Mackenzie Avenue, but we're not on Mackenzie Avenue in 2020. Molly was afraid that James was right. Somehow they had gone back to an earlier time. They looked at each other, excited, but a little afraid too. Just then they heard a clock. They looked inside the window of the old restaurant beside the CIBC bank, and they saw that it was a jewelry store. See if you can find the clock in this photograph. The big clock was inside the store, and there were men inside getting their railway watches checked. Molly and James walked across the street to where the flower shop and Kids on Main are now, and saw that it was Bu's drugstore. In the window was a blue bottle with a skull and crossbones on it. "That's a poison bottle," said James. And see if you can find the bottle in this picture. There were many other bottles of funny-looking medicines in the store window. "I'm glad we don't have to take any of those medicines," said Molly. "I bet they taste awful." They thought it was really funny that Modern Bake Shop was also a bakery long ago. They saw people come out of the bakery with loaves of bread wrapped in wax paper wrappers. There's the wrapper. And see if you can find it in the photo there. Then they walked up the steps of the big building that had the racket den in the basement and looked through the window. It was a bank. They could see the tellers inside using a wooden item with black beads on it. "Oh, look," said James. "He's using an abacus to add up the money. That's what they used before they had calculators." Now see if you can find the abacus in this picture. There was another bank called the Imperial Bank, where the CIBC Bank is now, in a big brick building. In the upstairs of the bank was the dentist's office with the big chair. There's the dentist's chair. And this is what it looks like in the museum now. Now, I know you've all seen this if you've come to the museum before. "I'm glad we didn't have to go to the dentist back then," said Molly. "I bet it hurt." They walked a little bit further to where the Royal Bank is now and discovered that it was a very large department store named C.B. Hume's. They went into the grocery department and found that all of the groceries were on shelves behind the counters. They watched as a woman asked the clerk for a bottle of vinegar. The clerk took it down from the shelf for her and wrapped the bottle up in brown paper. The clerk told her the total price for her groceries, and the woman handed him the cash. The clerk put the money into a jar connected to a wire and sent the jar up to the office on the second floor. The cashier upstairs made the change and sent it back down to the clerk in the jar. James was fascinated by this and wanted to keep watching, but Molly pulled him along to the next door. As they left, James said, "Did you see those cans of peas? They had glass on them so you could see the peas inside." See if you can find that in this picture showing the case in the museum. They saw that the Roxy Theatre was a hardware store with a different looking front entrance. They watched a man who was a miner coming out of the hardware store with a pack saddle to put on his horse to carry his supplies. See if you can find the pack saddle in this photograph. And he also had a black cooking pot. Can you find the pot on the stove here? The Grizzly Plaza bandshell wasn't there, but there were stores all the way along the street to Victoria Road. Molly and James spent a lot of time exploring the old Mackenzie Avenue. They found several big bank buildings and an old theatre where Hong Kong Restaurant is now. They discovered that Manning's Chinese restaurant was Manning's candy shop, which was a special favorite with both of them. They saw rabbit chocolate mold. Can you find the rabbit chocolate mold in this photograph? They saw a camera store that sold a stereoscope where you could look through and see a picture in 3D. You find the stereoscope there? They saw a Chinese restaurant that had a big stone item sitting on the floor. Molly knew that it was a rice grinder. James and Molly were excited by everything they saw, but they were getting a little worried. How could they get back to 2020? Maybe we have to look at the moon again, suggested James. Yes, let's try that, said Molly. But when they looked into the sky, they couldn't see a moon. Now they were really starting to get worried. They saw a man walking by carrying skis and a trophy. He saw the children and smiled. Look at this grand trophy, he said. I just won it at the ski jumping competition. See if you can find the trophy in this picture. My name is Nels Nelson, and I'm going to be world famous one day. The children smiled and nodded politely, and then James asked him, do you know what happened to the moon? Nels Nelson laughed. Why, there won't be a full moon for at least 2 weeks. Isn't it a bit late for you children to be out? You'd better get along home. James and Molly were both very upset now. 2 weeks, they exclaimed. What will Mom and Dad think? They both looked as though they would start crying, but just then they heard a bell ringing. Across the street was a woman who looked like a school teacher from olden days, ringing a school bell. James and Molly went over to her. Follow me, children, she said. I know how to get you home. The children followed the teacher to the end of Mackenzie Avenue, where the grizzly bear statue should have been. Look up, she said, and keep looking until you hear the bell again. The children looked up, and there in front of their eyes was the full moon again. They looked and looked until they heard the bell ringing, loudly at first, and then fainter and fainter. When they looked down, the schoolteacher had vanished, and they saw the Mackenzie Avenue that was so familiar to them. They saw the grizzly bear statues, and the bandshell, and the Roxy Theatre, and all of the other stores. Molly and James looked at each other and started laughing. Do you think Mom and Dad will ever believe us? James asked. I doubt it, said Molly, but we know it happened, and we'll never forget it. The end.